2 games in, Geno is getting closer to tying the all-time wins record. Let's talk about it. You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, a couple of quick updates. October was an incredible month for Locked On UConn. Thanks to your support, our community is growing fast, and we're thrilled to give back by donating 10% of our revenue to Husky Ticket Project, helping send kids to UConn basketball games and football games. We also make a monthly donation to Bleeding Blue for Good, and I hope you'll consider supporting them too. I saw Geno's ad asking for that on the Bleeding Blue for Good, so can't be wrong to do it, helping the UConn athletes. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to subscribe and follow wherever you listen. Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, much to people's excitement, we are bringing Emily Adams back on the program. Let's get her unmuted. Emily, you've watched them closely. You've written some great articles. What are your overall impressions about this UConn women's Huskies team that is now on the precipice of getting Geno the tying record for most wins of all time after 2 games going into this Friday against UNC?
Yeah, I've been saying I feel really good about it through these first 2 games. You know, I think obviously there have been, I think, some of the growing pains and sort of ugly moments and things that we expected coming in. But on the whole, it's looked a lot better, frankly, than I was expecting it to at this point. It's looked a lot more comfortable. It's looked a lot more seamless. Like it, you know, and this is still, you know, missing several of the best players on your roster. I've been really impressed with how quickly it seems like the young players have been able to integrate. And also, I mean, just how much of a step it feels like some of the slightly more experienced guys, you know, I feel like Brady's taken a big jump this year based on how she played in that South Florida game. Ashlyn Shade, I think, is obviously sort of the headliner in that department in taking a really big jump from year 1 to year 2. And I feel like we haven't seen a ton of KK yet as she's kind of ramping back up from that little like injury situation she had right before the start of the season. But even for her, you know, all of those guys have been such valuable contributors already. And I think that bodes really well as they start to move into the harder part of the schedule now.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that with probably the first like true test this Friday towards the end of the show when we talk about North Carolina preview. My question to you is, I said this the other day on one of the shows where I think it's human nature to see the shiny new toy of Kaitlyn Chen and Sarah Strong and forget about the people that kind of got you there outside of Paige, right? Ashlyn had a great year last year. KK Arnold. I've been most impressed with Ashlyn Shade. Like for me, her development from year 1 to 2 is immense, and you can see it on the defensive side. You can also see it on more assertive side on the offensive side of the ball. What does that give UConn? Just as kind of a running mate with Paige?
Yeah, I think the defense has been the biggest thing that stood out to me, and I feel like I started noticing it even in the exhibition. You know, that she looked stronger. She looked more focused on that side of the ball. She just looked more comfortable as sort of a true perimeter defender. And, you know, Kaitlyn is sort of stepping into the role of Nika in the practical sense. But I think, you know, Kaitlyn is much more of an offensive guard than she is a defensive one. And so I think there was sort of a question of who is that go-to perimeter guard now without Anika? And if you want Paige to sort of have the keys to the offense and be using most of her energy on that side of the ball. And I think Ashlyn has, I mean, just immediately kind of asserted herself as that person who's just sort of capable of whoever the opponent's best scorer is, like she's capable of taking on that assignment. And I think that's something she definitely didn't have last year. And that's a really, really big deal for them at this stage in the season. You know, Geno said defense is mostly about effort and repetition. Offense is a lot more about skill and finesse and knowing play calls and decision making and things like that. So it's a lot harder to get that to come together. And it's much, much easier to play good defense. And so I think with a really young team playing as well defensively as they have early on, with some of the young players kind of anchoring that effort, I think that's really, really promising for them as a starting point.
Yeah, I totally agree. I heard some comments before we get into the next segment where we talk about the chemistry between the team. You wrote an article about it, I think today. If you're not a subscriber to the Hartford Courant, do it. Subscribe to Emily's stuff. But I'm curious if you saw Geno say, "Just give me 5 healthy bodies, and we'll get to the Final Four." That's what we do at UConn. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to argue with it because it pretty much is what's happened for the last 3 years. I think, obviously the one year we saw it not happen was the year that Paige was out. And that was kind of a year when they struggled across the board. And I feel like that team, UConn has always had sort of at least one player who has that star power, who is capable of sort of taking over a game when they really need somebody to. And I felt like on that team, they didn't really have that. They had AZ was playing for some of that season, but was sort of in and out and wasn't fully healthy for most of it. And yeah, they just, they didn't have that star power. And I think now, even if you don't have Paige on the floor, obviously this is something Geno's talked about a lot, like not feeling confident in how they look with Paige off the floor. But based on how they've played early on, like, Sarah Strong looks very, very capable of being that player who can kind of just make a play when you need her to. And I think all of the freshmen have looked really good. You still have AZ coming back. You still have Aubrey Griffin, who warmed up a little bit before the opener coming back. So I think they have so much more just sort of depth of talent that, any of those groups of 5, I think are gonna put you in a position where you are a contender as long as you have kind of a star on the floor.
Yeah, no, I agree. Talk to me about Morgan Shelley. I think she's looked pretty good in limited action, but I think she's impressed. I talked about preseason that every one of the players that Geno brought in was a multitasking type player when they played in high school and AAU. They weren't just a scorer, they weren't just a rebounder. They did it all. Like, you just tell them their stats. And Morgan came in and she's done a really great job. Like, give me your thoughts on her, just quickly.
Yeah, I mean, for someone who, didn't get a whole lot of reps in the preseason, dealing with health stuff, going back to the summer, to the end of her high school season, I think the thing that stands out to me the most with her is just the confidence. She pulled up for a deep 3 on her first college shot, and it was nothing but net, and then did it again in the South Florida game. Both of her field goals, I think, ended up being 3-pointers. It was her first 2 shots of the game. So she just has sort of a fearlessness, I think, in the way she plays that you don't get with freshmen a lot. Like, I think she doesn't play with that sort of nervous energy that young players have, and that I feel like is really exciting in terms of just having her be someone that can play minutes in big moments and minutes against higher caliber competition, and not sort of worry about her flinching away from those kind of matchups.
Absolutely. All right, well, we return. Let's talk about the chemistry that is brewing on this team, and we'll get Emily's thoughts on that after this. Game Time, the perfect app for grabbing last-minute tickets. I was just on there the other day checking out tickets for UConn versus UNC at the Greensboro Coliseum, and it couldn't have been easier. Game Time's fast, simple, and has all the best prices right at your fingertips. If you're looking to catch a game or any event, don't stress about finding seats. Just download the Game Time app, and at the checkout, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Don't miss out. Game Time has you covered. Game Time. Do not miss any of the action with the Game Time app. All right, you're back on Locked On UConn with Emily Adams, beat reporter for the Hartford Courant. Emily, you wrote a great article in the Hartford Courant about Kaitlyn Chen and Sarah Strong finding chemistry quickly. I think the whole team has some chemistry brewing. But talk to me about what stood out with the two of them, obviously being newcomers to you, that you wrote that article.
Yeah, we saw Kaitlyn and Sarah obviously started both of those first two games, and I expect that to continue based on how performances went from the two of them. But yeah, I think throughout the preseason, a lot of what we heard from players, from Geno, was just sort of we're seeing how everything comes together. It's a lot of people who have never played together before. It's a lot of players who have never played at UConn before. It's a lot of players who have never played in college before. So they're sort of working with a lot of newness and unknown right now. But it feels like between the players, they look very comfortable already to me. You saw, Paige and Sarah have a pretty clear connection already between the two of them, just in terms of understanding where each other are going to be on the floor. And I think the same is true with Kaitlyn. Like, Kaitlyn understands Paige's tendencies very well already. She sees where Paige likes to get out in transition. I think she's pretty good at sort of balancing her own scoring with knowing when to look for the pass. That was something I think, Nika was very much not a scorer. Nika was always going to look to pass before she shot. And Kaitlyn kind of gives you that additional dimension of being able to drive a little bit and pop a pass out. Like we saw on that first play that she had to ice to start the South Florida game on that nice little bounce pass that she threaded. So I think seeing her kind of settle in as a passer is really huge for them. It gives them an extra sort of playmaker and facilitator next to Paige, so that she doesn't have to be kind of the one running the floor as much in that respect. And I just think it's an IQ thing for all three of them. They're just three incredibly high IQ basketball players. They all understand the game really well. They all have really, really strong vision. And so, like Geno said, it's really easy for players who think similarly like that to build chemistry and to understand where each other are going to be. It just sort of is something that comes naturally. And so I think that's also a testament to just kind of the construction of this roster. These pieces just, I feel like, fit very well together. These players make sense, in the way that their skill sets complement each other. And we're seeing it translate early, even when it's not perfect. I think, so many of the sort of baseline fundamental things that you want to see at this point in a season are there already. Which I think, obviously those connections are only going to grow the more and more time that they get in actual game situations together.
Yeah, I was interested to hear your thoughts, because Geno said after the game that that Kaitlyn has played just a ton of basketball, and that's a big reason why he kind of doesn't care the decisions that she makes, that she doesn't have to check with him if she shoots it or passes it. And I think that, to your point, I think a lot of the players that feel the same way are Paige and Sarah. I think would be in those, even though Sarah's a freshman, she's not playing like one. So I think that kind of leads to that chemistry where it's like they have freedom to do what they need to do, because they don't have to worry about being benched. It's like there's no that. So I think having the trust in the coach kind of leads to kind of this chemistry that it's building only after two games. Do you agree?
Yeah, and it's nice, to be able to start. You look at last year, obviously, going to UNC game 3 is not an easy game, but they went to an NC State team that made the Final Four last year in game 2 last season. So, I feel like, as difficult as this year's schedule is, they gave themselves a little bit more of a buffer this year to kind of get into the swing of things, to play people for 20, 25 minutes a game and not have it feel like, okay, I'm pulling you out of this because it's not working and we need to score right now or we're going to lose. We can go up 30, sit all the starters down and see how it looks with the young guys and play with combinations and things like that. And I think that's been really, really helpful for them, just in terms of being able to build those connections early and figure out scenarios early, just, not kind of getting thrown straight off the deep end and getting a chance to experiment a little bit before they have to play some of those really big time matchups that are going to become must wins when you look at like tournament seeding and things like that.
Absolutely. Talk to me about how unreal Paige Bueckers has been.
Yeah, it's not surprising. Obviously, I don't think it can be anymore, but she just looks so good. I feel like she has taken it to a different level, obviously, even, from where she was last year. And she was at a pretty elite level last year to begin with. I think, the thing with her that really sets her apart, I think, from everybody else in college basketball is the efficiency. It's something that no other guard of her caliber has. She shot 90% against USF. I think she's at like 74% on the season or something.
73.7. Yep.
Yeah, she's like top 5 in the country among guards in shooting percentage right now. I mean, it's just the sort of wherewithal, I think, to be in a game situation and able to make all the shots she does, but be also able to have the IQ to have the shot selection that she makes. She doesn't take bad shots. She doesn't take dumb shots. And even when a shot looks crazy, I don't think there's ever a doubt that she would take it if she thought she wasn't capable of making it. She is someone who's not going to let opportunities go to waste. And so she's going to set herself up to have the best chance at success. And that also means the team having the best chance at success. And I think it's translating already. It's when Paige is playing smart, it benefits everybody around her. When Paige is scoring at the clip she's been scoring at, it makes everybody around her better. Kaitlyn had 6 assists in the first half of the South Florida game, half of them were to Paige. So, it's just one of those things where she's not someone that you can stop. She's someone that you have to limit as an opponent if you're trying to game plan for her. You have to accept that she's gonna score 20 points and you have to stop her from scoring 35.
That's right. When I was, you just made me think of something. When I was a kid, I used to watch the Michael Jordan "Come Fly with Me" video every day before school, and they would say, "You cannot stop him. You can only hope to contain him." And that's seriously what Paige is. Like, you cannot stop her. But
like,
also,
she is on that level this year.
Oh yeah, she is 1000%. But also, before we get into the UNC preview in the next segment, this is music to UConn fans' ears. 6 players are averaging 22 minutes a game right now. And the other 2, Morgan Shelley, or the other 3, Geno Auriemma, Morgan Shelley, and Ali Zabal, are averaging 17.5, 14.5, and 12.5, respectively, with Caden Samuels as being the only one under 10 minutes, 8.5 in 2 games. So this is a absolute sigh of relief for Husky fans that are worried about injury, worried about people coming back. This team looks good right now, and there's more people coming. Who do you think of that, of what I just mentioned? Who's going to lose minutes off of this? I know that's a crappy thing to happen, but it's a fact of life. When some better players come back, AZ and others, who do you think is going to be kind of the odd woman out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely going to start to see, that bottom part of the, Chelly and Ali and probably Cadence as well. Like that group is probably not going to see minutes a ton in the really big games. You might see something where, those guys get thrown in for a couple minutes if shooters are cold and things like that, just because they all have that. I think even with Cadence, we've seen through these first couple of games, she can pull up and hit a 3 if they need her to. And so having that ability to just sort of go to other looks is helpful. But yeah, I think the younger guys are definitely not going to be playing at the same capacity outside of Sarah once we get into, that stretch of top 10 teams that they have in December. But I think right now it's so promising that, Geno's even comfortable. We're seeing him go 10 deep in the first half. And that's not something we saw last year, even in blowouts. And so I think that's been the most promising thing for me, is that he's comfortable doing that. He's comfortable letting them kind of figure it out. And it never felt like, last year with Amari DeBerry and with Anesh Betancourt, that he was willing to put them out there, even in a blowout, that he was sort of never willing to risk having them on the floor. It felt like, and it doesn't seem like there's as much risk involved with this group. They're not going to hurt you. At worst, they're going to sort of not elevate you in the same way that some of the bigger names are. But yeah, I think everybody on this roster is capable of playing minutes against anybody, and that's something that they have not had in a very long time.
It's a great point. When we return, let's talk about turning our attention to Friday's matchup in the New Horizons Coliseum. I got to get used to saying that because it's not Greensboro Coliseum anymore, against the Carolina Tar Heels. We'll talk about that coming up after the break. What's up, NFL fans? Get ready to tackle all the action with America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you actually place your bets. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports partner of the NFL. And you're back on Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, with beat reporter Emily Adams of the Hartford Courant. All right. We've talked about 2 games in. We feel pretty good. The chemistry is brewing. Paige has been unreal, shooting 74% from the floor. Crazy stat is they're shooting 40% from 3 as a team, and Morgan Shelley is shooting 100%. Caden Samuels is 40%, and Ali Zabal is shooting 67%. So
not too shabby.
not bad. So Paige is shooting 50%. So the rest of the starting 5 and others who are playing big time minutes need to pick it up a little bit, so they're not getting bailed out by the rooks. But as we're going into Friday's game in Greensboro, you can call it a neutral site game. It's a road game. Carolina is an hour away from their home. I live in Greensboro. I will be there. So one of the things that I'm looking forward to is how they handle a road crowd, because to be honest, Carolina fans travel. And, I know there's going to be some UConn fans there because obviously they're the biggest name in the sport. So I don't think it's going to be as neutral as it supposedly says, because it is in North Carolina, pretty close. What are your kind of initial thoughts about that and this Carolina team that UConn faces on Friday evening?
Yeah, I covered a game in Chapel Hill last year when North Carolina hosted South Carolina, and that was a really, really cool environment. They really packed that building out. They take their women's basketball seriously down there, especially because they've really been on an upswing again the last couple of years. So yeah, I think it will hopefully be a really good environment. Obviously, UConn fans kind of travel everywhere, so I'm sure there'll be pockets for them as well. But UNC is a very interesting team to me this year. Obviously, we just saw Deja Kelly lead Oregon to the big upset over Baylor a couple days ago, kind of showcasing what a big loss that was for them. But I'm a big fan of Lexi Donarski. I've liked her since her Iowa State days. I love a two-way, defensive player. And Alyssa Usby too has been, really, really good the last couple of years for them. I think she was a finalist last year for one of the Basketball Hall of Fame awards. So, it's a talented group. It just sort of, I feel like they have they're in kind of a similar situation to UConn where they're trying to put pieces together right now. And they have a lot less talent than UConn does right now.
Yeah.
Their first couple games, have been blowouts, but not huge ones. They're giving up 50 plus to some of these, FCS type teams that they're playing early on. And, I don't know if UNC has the juice right now to really push a team like UConn, but, at the same time, I saw them really push South Carolina last year, and that South Carolina team went on to go 38-0. So, I think Courtney Banghart's a really good coach. This is a team that I think, might give you a really tough first half. But I don't think they have the full top to bottom ability like UConn does to really take them a full 4 quarters.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate. If you're UNC right now, I think everybody goes into a game, especially if you're on the upswing. I know you said that you feel like UNC is maybe a little higher in the AP poll than you had them. So not that you don't believe in them, so don't get at Emily. Don't be in her mentions talking about how she's a Tar Heel hater, okay? But what I will say is they're playing UConn. Whether there's a 2 next to their number or a 1, you're always getting someone's best shot. So what is if you're a Carolina fan and you decided to turn on Locked On UConn to kind of hear this side, what does Carolina have to do to make it a competitive game and then potentially pull an upset?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I think a lot of this game is going to come down to the post players for UConn, honestly, but for Ice Brady and for Geno Auriemma. Obviously, I think both of them have had pretty decent starts so far. A little bit of a mixed bag between the two games for both of them. Ice had a better second game. Geno had a better first game. But I think we've seen the flashes from both of them of kind of what the ceiling is. But UNC has some size. Obviously, Alyssa is a really, really good forward. Maria Gakdang, I like a lot as well. She's on the preseason watch list for the Lisa Leslie Award. So, they have a lot more size than a team like South Florida or a team like Boston is going to be able to throw at you. And so I think it's the first real, test of those two. Ice obviously playing a lot more 5 this year than she played last year when Aaliyah Edwards was kind of holding that down. And this is definitely the toughest, competition that they're going to face in the paint through these first couple of weeks. So I think this will be a really good indication of where those two are at in their development, where they're at in their progression in terms of being able to be, consistent impact players and who's, I think too, kind of whether one of them can pull away and establish themselves as, the go-to 5. Because I feel like right now, neither one, it wouldn't surprise me at this point to see Geno start some games at some point. It wouldn't surprise me to see Ice hold on to it. Like, I feel like there's a lot of different directions they can go with that front court right now, especially when you consider you have Sarah who can kind of play wherever you need her to at this point.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's the biggest test for them in this game is whether they can sort of hang with the UNC front court, whether Ice can kind of really get in there and post up with Maria, whether Geno can stay out of foul trouble when you're dealing with, Power 5 refs on the road. It's a slightly different animal, especially for her in, her first game against a ranked team ever. So yeah, I think that's really where the challenge is going to come in for them is with that group. The backcourt, I'm not as worried about.
Okay. And it's also a bit of a homecoming for Sarah because I know she's not from Greensboro, but she's from the state of North Carolina. She's from the Fuquay Arena area, which is about an hour and a half away from Greensboro, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that'll be an interesting thing to see how she and maybe I'm wrong, but did she get an offer from Carolina as well? I'm pretty sure she did.
This one has to sting a little bit for Carolina because Carolina and Duke, I believe, were the other two finalists alongside UConn.
Thought so too. Yep.
When she starts pulling up, that one might hurt Courtney a little bit. That one might hit in the heart.
Yep, definitely. Last question is: do you think? I mean, this is not something that I'm advocating or think that they should do, but do you think there's ever a moment where if they feel like either Jana or Ice is not necessarily doing what Geno wants them to do? Like you just said, it's been kind of a mixed bag, and I agree. I think Jana was great against Boston. Ice was better against South Florida. Is there a thought to essentially putting Sarah at the 5 and just having a bunch of wings around her and big guards?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely see that at some points, especially in like matchup dependent situations. Something that Geno talked about after BU was feeling like both Ice and Jana, or maybe this was after Fort Hayes, but talking about them both having kind of a harder time adjusting to dealing with smaller players in the paint and, players who didn't have that kind of post presence that they're used to dealing with like a top 10 team. And so I think that can be difficult when you're playing a really small team and you have, 6'5" and 6'4" down in the paint. So yeah, I think the ability to kind of move Sarah into more of that center spot and play small, frankly, like they did a lot last year with Aaliyah and 4 guards around her. I think that lineup worked really well for them at times. I think they have this year the luxury of not having to do that all the time because it certainly doesn't work against everybody. I think, frankly, it wouldn't work against a team like UNC who has some additional size that they need to match. But I think especially once we get into like Big East play, it would not surprise me to see that lineup quite a bit and to see that be a very high scoring group.
Yeah, no, I think for me, what I would love to see from it is just basically like a 7-minute stretch where it's just to kind of give the bigs a break and then just really kind of run people out of the gym. Essentially, that's what I was thinking more versus kind of playing against either South Carolina or Iowa State or any of these other teams that they're going to have to, bang with down low. But I think, again, I'm not Geno Auriemma, and I don't have 1,215 wins, so I'm going to shut up about it. I just was just a thought. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the game on Friday. Obviously, I can get to be there in person, which is super exciting for me. But again, thank you so much for joining the program. Guys, if you have not already subscribed to Emily Adams on Harvard Current, do so. I don't know what it costs. I don't care. It costs $100. It's worth it. Check her stuff out. She does a fantastic job. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto. Thank you to Emily. We're asking you to stay locked on, stay connected, and to remember it's not just about getting it done. It's about doing it in a way that it can't be done any better. That's our goal every day here. It's been the goal for Geno and his staff for 40 years. Go UConn. We'll see you Friday.